Fáilte Corda, a very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to you all this morning for our virtually sold out event and the latest in European Movement Ireland's In Conversation series. My name is Noelle O'Connell and I'm the CEO of European Movement Ireland. And I'm delighted that we are joined this morning by the Chairman of EM Ireland, Maurice Pratt, who will be speaking with our guest of honour, President of the Eurogroup and Minister for Finance, Paschal Donohoe TD. I'm delighted that Minister Donohoe is going to be talking to us today wearing his Eurozone, Eurogroup President hat specifically. So very warm welcome to you both. We're going to be looking at topics including the prospects for economic recovery, the future of the Eurozone, and the EU's response to COVID-19. I'd like to warmly welcome both Minister Donohoe and Maurice this morning. Thank you both very much for being with us, and hope you are keeping well and safe in these challenging times. In terms of proceedings for this morning's In Conversation event, very shortly, Minister Donohoe will present a keynote address to us, after which he and Maurice will have a conversation on a number of key issues, before the reins are then handed back to me to host our audience-led question and answer session with Minister Donohoe. And in that regard, if you would like to pose a question to the Minister, please do submit them via the events@europeanmovement.ie email. We've already got a number of questions coming in from the audience, which is fantastic to see. And for those of you active on social media, please feel free to use hashtag EMI events and hashtag Eurogroup. And my colleagues are keeping an eye on social media as well, so they'll be feeding those comments and questions to me. Now, while our esteemed participants this morning are very well known to all of us, I will nonetheless briefly introduce them. As I mentioned, Maurice Pratt is Chairman of European Movement Ireland. Maurice is a former President of IBEC, and he is also currently Chair of Unifar, Barrettstown, Nursing Homes Ireland, B&B Ireland, and of course ourselves in EMI. Maurice, a very good morning to you. And to our guest of honour, born in Phibsborough, Minister Paschal Donohoe holds a degree from Trinity College Dublin in politics and economics, and he was elected a TD for Dublin Central from 2011. He was formerly the chair of Ireland's Future in Europe Oireachtas subcommittee, as well as a member of the Public Accounts Committee. He has also served as the vice chair of the European Affairs Committee, and well known to all of us from his time when his first ministerial post was as Minister for State for European Affairs from 2013 to 2014, followed by Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport from 2014 to 2016. He was previously Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform from 2016 to 2020, and since 2017, he has held the post as Minister for Finance. And we're delighted that he is speaking to us today in perhaps his other hat, when he was elected President of the Eurogroup in July 2020, beating off quite stiff competition, and his 2.5-year term began the middle of July 2020. And without further ado, it is my honour to invite Minister Donohoe to deliver his keynote address. Minister, you have the virtual floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Noel. Good morning, Morris. And I'm delighted to be with you all here today. As you all know, the International European Movement Network, of which you are a part, was established over 7 decades ago. And you, along with your sister organisations, have spent so many years communicating and inspiring citizens to learn about and to engage with our European community, which is, of course, our Union of Nations. This work remains as important now as it was when you began your work in 1953, when Ireland was looking at the nascent European coal and steel community. A very different Ireland, and indeed a very different Europe. While no one could have seen then the enormous social, political and economic changes that have transformed our world in the time since, I think it would have been equally as unforeseen to your members in 1953 how transformative membership of the European project would be for our country. We are part of what the economist Martin Sandbu refers to as the deepest voluntary project of globalization the world has ever seen. And this has not only been transformative for us as a nation, it has been so for us as citizens, for our feeling, I think, of what it is to be Irish. Like many others, I see my Irish and my European citizenship as closely interconnected, mutually beneficial aspects of my own sense of my nationality. And as such, it's a great personal honour for me to hold the European post of President of the Eurogroup, as well as that, of course, of Minister for Finance of our country. And I want to reflect on how my experiences as an Irish Minister for Finance and as an Irish and European citizen helped me in my work as President of the Eurogroup. To do this, I am so conscious that we're all fatigued and all worn out by endless webinars. So I'm going to briefly set out my role as President of the Eurogroup, the objectives of the Eurogroup, what they mean for Europe and Ireland, and then reflect on some of my learnings in that work and how this can be applied to our work in Europe. After that, I really look forward to all your questions and answers. So to begin, I was elected President of the Eurogroup last July for a 2.5-year term. As many of you will know, the Eurogroup is an informal body of finance ministers inside the Euro area. Our main goal is to achieve consensus on economic policy through a focus on political discussion. It's somewhat different to ECOFIN's more legislative role, and the latter, ECOFIN, is also explicitly an EU 27 body. The Eurogroup is a political body with political processes and political objectives. As President, I engage very regularly with the institutions of our Union. This includes the ECB, the Commission, the ESM and the Council. We also have regular so-called interinstitutional actor meetings, or in more colloquial terms, a four presidents call, which involves presidents of the Council, the Commission, the Central Bank, and myself. These discussions feed into the work we do within Eurogroup. Another important part of my work is to represent the Eurogroup at the European Council, where I presented to our leaders only last week on the international role of the euro. I also represent the Eurogroup at G7 meetings, which are currently chaired by the United Kingdom, with a particular focus at the moment on the common challenges created by COVID and the global economic response. We're also fortunate in that we can expand the Eurogroup into a more inclusive format, depending on the topic at hand. This can involve opening up our discussions to include non-Euro area countries, but also by inviting external speakers in to participate on particular topics. This has included representatives from the World Health Organization and the European Centre for Disease Control to get their views on COVID-19, but also briefing some other experts depending on the topic. So that's what the Eurogroup is. Onto our work plan. We have, as you'd expect, a very detailed work plan with 5 broad priorities. First, the pursuit of economic and fiscal policies to support recovery and long-term growth. Second, the use of banking union as a source of stability and a source of growth. Third, a focus on the euro area dimensions of capital markets union. Fourth, the future of the euro as a digital currency. And then finally, the international role of the euro. I won't discuss all of these today, as I want to focus primarily on the first item, economic and fiscal policies that support recovery, as I think it illustrates some of the more important lessons in how we seek to influence and participate in European economic policy making. In more normal times, the aim of the Eurogroup is to ensure the close coordination of economic policies across member states so as to promote stronger and more resilient growth. Obviously, our primary focus now is on economic recovery and coordinating our actions to drive an inclusive and strong recovery as opposed to just a temporary rebound. The distinction between recovery and rebound is a particular priority, and it's reflected in our work to date. To be clear, as the vaccination process gathers momentum and restrictions ease, we will see an automatic upturn in activity. We saw elements of this last summer in Ireland and in the euro area with very strong figures in the third quarter. In the coming months, we will see a resurgence in domestic demand as restrictions gradually ease, and we can already see an elevated level of household savings. However, we need to ensure that the upturn is long-lasting, that it's sustainable. This is at the heart of our income and business support measures, both in Ireland and in the euro area. The relevance and value of this strategy is vital in uncertain times, and it's so helpful for us at Eurogroup to have clarity that every member state at the table has adopted a supportive budgetary stance that feeds into a recovery in the real economy. It's vital for business owners and employers, as they're more likely to keep people in employment and to invest in their business if they know that not only their country, but also all the other countries in our currency union have a supportive budgetary stance. The reality is that the economic confidence effects this creates are greater than the sum of each country's supportive fiscal stance. The European response to this crisis economically has been extraordinary in terms of its size, speed, and coordination. Just to highlight a few points. We built up the necessary level of political momentum to set up the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Eurogroup was also supportive of the General Escape Clause for the first time since last March. This sent out a clear and very early signal to markets and citizens that this crisis and our response to it would be different. 3 critical key safety nets were also quickly agreed at Eurogroup as a direct response to counter COVID-19, to the value of €540 billion. The SURE programme, the European Stability Mechanisms, Pandemic Crisis Support, and the EIB's Pan-European Guarantee Fund. These are all now fully operational. In real terms, the SURE programme has supported furlough schemes in 18 EU countries, benefiting 21.5 million employees and 5 million self-employed, or a quarter of total employment across the recipient EU countries. These are not abstract big numbers. These are real people, real workers, and real businesses, the lifeblood of our economies and of our societies. And the SURE and indeed other government schemes are protecting these incomes, preventing long-term economic scarring, and laying the first foundations for a sustainable recovery. More broadly, the centrepiece of the EU response to date has been the Next Generation EU and Recovery and Resilience Facility. While just over a year ago, this crisis would have been unimaginable, I think this element of the European response to the crisis would have been equally unimaginable. Of course, national governments have also played a pivotal role, as has our European Central Bank. There's no question that budgetary and monetary policy have worked hand in hand. From the outset, the ECB have been decisive in their monetary policy actions, notably through the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Programme. Its decisions have been vital in keeping yields low and in providing liquidity. This has helped instill an air of confidence and certainty at a time marked by uncertainty. This has allowed national governments to step up and take unprecedented steps to protect income, lives, and livelihoods. And while estimates vary, last year close to 8% of GDP was spent supporting our euro area economies, with an additional 19% of GDP in various types of liquidity support. All of these decisions have helped supports flow in an efficient and an effective manner. Reflecting back on what has been done, speed, breadth, and depth of economic decision-making stands out. In recent weeks, and as I've mentioned earlier, we have seen a number of comparisons on the respective sizes of the EU and US responses. These debates are, of course, important, but we need to make sure we don't miss a critical point. We should make sure we don't deflect from the value of what these and all countries are doing. Aside from obvious differences between the US and the EU countries, there are inherent differences in our economies, our social protection systems, and in our longer-term objectives. Ultimately, what both we in Europe and our colleagues and partners in America are doing are injecting huge amounts of resources into battling this disease. These stimuli will mutually reinforce one another. I want to give you a particular point and insight into how our Eurogroup practically impacts on the budgetary policy of the 19 euro area member states based on our meeting of a couple of weeks ago. At Eurogroup, we've regular discussions, as you'd expect, on economic policy. Usually these debates occur at particular points in the year. However, last month, we issued a very strong statement on which there was unanimity. This was driven by a consensus that we needed to reaffirm not only our budgetary policy coordination, but also the messaging with regards to it, not just for this year, but also for next year, so that member states could prepare budgets that continue the vital economic supports to citizens and businesses. There are a number of different elements to it, but the key takeaway was the absolute consensus on the need for supportive economic policies right across the euro area. In simple terms, we reaffirmed that there'll be no premature withdrawal of budgetary support. The Eurogroup will also issue further guidance later in the year as new data and information comes in. And over the summer, we'll take the economic policy conversation forward with a particular focus on next year. Budgetary policy will need to remain flexible to win the economic battle against the pandemic. In fact, this was at the heart of the second part of our statement, where we emphasised the need for budgetary policy at the right point to pivot towards more targeted supports. We also explicitly recognised the challenge posed by higher levels of indebtedness, an inevitable byproduct of the exceptional supports at present, and the need to address this in time through differentiated and more sustainable medium-term strategies. We also stressed the need for ambitious reforms and productive investment supported by the RRF. So this agreement of the Eurogroup statement 2 weeks ago, and indeed my first 6 months in the role, have allowed me to reflect on some important lessons for advancing our policies through Eurogroup and through our union. In very simple terms, these could be summarised by 3 C's: consensus, constant dialogue, and create momentum. In terms of consensus, I'm conscious that many of you have considerable insight and experience into European decision-making and the importance of consensus. But it's absolutely vital, as this means that member states take national ownership of shared decisions. The building up of consensus can only happen through constant dialogue, particularly in times of extraordinary pressure on governments, such as what we are living through now. The sharing of experiences and perspectives at Eurogroup engages ministers in our decisions and discussions and builds up our understanding and the remarkably similar challenges that we face. The similarity of these challenges are illustrated by the closure of hospitality sectors, from ski resorts in Austria to sun resorts in Spain. We're all working to select the best supports for those impacted, such as job retention schemes. Often, the only difference is one of timing. Another element of constant dialogue is the preparation for Eurogroup to ensure relevant political discussions that feature a high level of engagement. In practical terms, for me, this means that every Eurogroup meeting is preceded by numerous calls to my ministerial colleagues and to their teams. It is one of the means that I use most to help understand key issues before each Eurogroup. This dialogue also allows us to build the pillars of rapport and understanding upon which all political agreements rest. And then finally, in advancing Eurogroup agreement on difficult issues, it's important to create a sense of momentum that agreement will be reached by framing the objectives in political terms so that we all can agree upon them and then endorse them. In present circumstances, it's how our decisions assist the provision of vital supports to citizens and companies. Then we can turn to working out the technical elements of each agreement. This approach is illustrated by our end November agreement on ESM treaty reform and the early introduction of the backstop to the Single Resolution Fund, and also this month's agreement on a supportive fiscal stance. These agreements were achieved as there was unity of purpose from ministers on how best to support European citizens. So in conclusion, there's no doubt as to how exceptionally seismic this shock has been. COVID has been a tremendous challenge to all of us. In fact, we face a virus that uses the same qualities to infect that we rely upon in Europe: our interconnectedness, our interdependence, and our interconnectivity. So there is indeed an inherent symmetry to all of this. However, there's also a tremendous sense of symmetry in our response. Europe's response to this crisis has been different. Critical to this is the fact that we have the political processes and structures in place to support one another. This, I feel, is a key difference for this crisis. We're building new instruments, new safeguards, and new tools. Some of these are already operational, such as the SURE programme, while others, such as the RRF, are underway and will soon make a difference. We've achieved an unprecedented level of coordination on economic and fiscal matters over the past year. And all of this is based on the clear goal of supporting citizens, businesses, and countries at a time of great need. Coming back to Martin Sandbu again and his writing on the European Union, to align the political values of different nations, whether in a broad sense that the European project seeks or in a specific area, is not a mere technical policy challenges. Successfully melding openness and domestic satisfaction requires statecraft. So that is what we strive for within the Eurogroup, and it is both worth the effort and also capable of delivering results. Thank you, Noel.
Minister, thank you very much for your presentation, both for its breadth and for its depth. And again, always with events like this, I think one learns something. So I didn't realize that the Eurogroup had a seat at the or you as president of the Eurogroup had a seat at the G7 table. It would be fascinating to hear subsequently how you get on at that event later in the year and how its implications roll out. Could I first just talk about your own role as president of the Eurogroup? And now you're in that role for 9 months. And obviously you've given us a great insight into how it works and how it operates. So what's the process you go through to get 19 member states to agree, to get to the consensus? And I suppose the second part of that question would be, as you go forward, do you think that the handling of the crisis will help the European Union in terms of greater cooperation and greater closeness in the future?
Thanks very much, Maurice. So in terms of the first question about how you build up agreement, the first stage to it is every 6 months we agree a work plan for the following 6 to 9 month period. And that lays out meeting by meeting within Eurogroup what we're looking to engage on and what the output of that meeting will be. So a huge amount of effort goes into getting agreement on the work plan, and then that sets out the work we're looking to achieve across the short to medium term. And then in terms of how you get agreement, it's the familiar efforts that we're all very acquainted with now at a time of COVID, but we would have done in a different way physically in the pre-pandemic era. It's a huge amount of time on the phone call with all of your colleagues, huge amount of time spent staring at computer screens, engaging with different capitals. In the run-up to every Eurogroup meeting, I would say I speak to between half to 3/4 of the members of the Eurogroup. And across every 6 to 8 week period, I speak to every member of the Eurogroup at least on a single occasion, if not more than that. So it's a lot of phone calls, video conferences, and dialogue. And you use that to set the environment then for those moments of negotiation, such as we had last November and then we had in the run up to February.
And at a personal level, I mean, how do you balance the role as Minister for Finance for Ireland and the Eurogroup? I mean, obviously Zooming and all the rest of it helps insofar as you don't have to maybe travel as often as you might have done historically, or you might do in that role. But how have you managed to balance those two roles? Because they're obviously both very challenging.
It's extraordinary the way they actually inform each other, and the way in which the experience that you gain within the Eurogroup is of such help then for the work that you do as Minister for Finance for Ireland. So if I look at some of the biggest decisions I've been involved in over the last 12 months, which would be the employment wage subsidy scheme, supports that we've had, such as the COVID restriction support scheme, decisions that we've had to make about the level of our borrowing and what we're going to be doing across this year and next year. All of that was informed by work that I've done within the Eurogroup. And you learn so much from having a more detailed appreciation of what your colleagues are doing across Europe to help and guide the work that you're doing within Ireland. So it is, in truth, a little bit more work. But for doing that little bit more work, you gain such an array of insight into what colleagues are doing and into, obviously, the future of the euro area. And as a small open economy, those are incredibly valuable inputs into the work then we do for our small open economy here in Ireland.
Thank you. Yeah, I can see how that would be so important. So thinking about the sort of pandemic, and we're now just a year into it, and you know, we've been told it's a once in a generation event, black swan event, as the markets like to talk about these things. So one assumes, therefore, that ourselves and EU member states would have somewhere on their risk register have had something like a pandemic happening. I'm just kind of wondering, and presumably some mitigation factors in relation to that. I'm just wondering, are there one or two highlights that you would point to now in terms of lessons learned, which would be very important to us in the future in managing an event like this?
God, Morris, that's a great question in terms of what we will bring to the future for all of this. There would be maybe pick two things, one of which I touched on in the speech there a few moments ago. The bigger kind of policy theme would be, yet again, a further reminder of how our interdependence is a source both of strength and can be a source of vulnerability. So the vulnerability we are well aware of, in that we ended up contesting and battling against a disease that spreads by contact. And then the strength is that so much of what we are now doing is made stronger by coordinating our efforts. So it has been yet again another reminder to me of how interdependence can both strengthen your response, but also strengthen your prospects and your opportunities, but how nearly uniquely it ended up also being a new source of challenge for us. So the Eurogroup meetings that we had in March, April and May, I'll never forget, when I had so many of my colleagues elsewhere in Europe paint the scenes of what was happening within their countries and what that meant for them. And even though we were in very dark and difficult points then, Morris, to hear some of my colleagues who I've got to know really well on a personal level talk about what they were confronting in parts of their country reminded me and demonstrated to me the unique and historic nature of the challenge that we faced then. And then a more health relevant learning from all of us is the public health dimension of all of our health systems and how that will need to change for the future is a very practical learning, but one that I think we will all live with now forever, in terms of how we need to be better prepared and better equipped for diseases that within a space of weeks, even a space of days, can change our societies. So they're broadly the interdependence point, and then very specifically what that means for the future of our public health systems.
Yeah, no, thank you. They are great insights, and I often think myself that, having been through previous crises in business, one of the things we didn't do at the time, and a great learning was, when you're in the moment, is just to write it down and remember, because it's amazing how the world moves on, and you move on to the next issue, and you don't necessarily track the learning. So it's great to hear you sort of reflect on it in that way. I think it'll be beneficial. I think solidarity to me is probably what's come more so than anything else, listening to you talk from within the sort of Eurogroup area and within Europe, which is great. Can I turn to something slightly domestic for a second in relation to national recovery plans? And as I understand it, you know, each member state has to present its national recovery plan, and that will feed in then to the overall 750 billion euro recovery fund. So two questions. One is, where is that at now? Secondly, has Ireland edited its plan? And then the third question related to that would be, and you mentioned earlier, and you're right, the difference there is between, say, the United States 1.9 trillion investment and what Europe is doing, and so on. But I'm wondering if it could be a bit challenging on that. Do you think we're actually moving fast enough in Europe in order to get that recovery kick-started? So sorry about that, but three questions in one.
So, Maurice, what was the second one? I got the first and the third.
The second one related to the have we submitted our plan, and
Okay,
other,
sure.
you know, where are we at with that?
So where to deal with your first 2 points, so where it stands at the moment is we did indeed submit a plan to the Commission. The formal deadline for these plans is the end of April, but working in conjunction with Minister Michael McGrath, we shared a version of the plan in advance of the deadline, so we could begin engagement with the Commission early. And all that took place at official level towards the end of February, start of March. And then myself and Minister McGrath met Commissioner Gentiloni, who is the Commissioner with responsibility for engagement with the Ireland Recovery and Resilience Plan last week. And where it stands now is we have submitted a group of projects and programmes that look to deliver the green and digital transformation and change that the European Union is focused on. And we've also committed to how we will respond back to the different reform proposals that the Commission have anchored in the country-specific recommendations of 2019 and 2020. So we're engaging in all of that at the moment, Maurice. And as we move into early May, I think we will become clearer on the exact nature of our own plan then, and the particular changes and reform measures that the Commission will ask us, and we would want to be anyhow, committed to. In terms of the United States plan, it's just inevitable at a time of such challenge that there's going to be comparisons between what we are doing and the United States are doing. And those comparisons could indeed grow if the United States move ahead with a further stimulus package in terms of infrastructure. But I think 2 points that are important to the debate that we're going to have. The first one will be is what is of greater value than a comparison of the scale of responses is the fact that the Euro area and the United States are both putting in place responses that are profoundly different to where we were a decade ago. The fact that we are debating the scale of historical stimulus packages and comparing the aggregate of the different budgetary packages, we should be careful that we don't let that overshadow the fact that these packages are happening in the first place, and they're making a massive difference to both where we are now and to our future. And then secondly, what will be happening now at national level is that member state governments within the euro area and indeed across the European Union will be making different decisions then as we move through 2021. And we saw the German government do that last week, which will add to the plans they will put in place under the Recovery and Resilience Fund. And while each of those decisions don't have the prominence that, for example, the RRF did last year, or President Biden's stimulus plan did this year, you add together all the national decisions as we move through the year. And I'm certain that you'll continue to see us respond back to the economic needs that we have within Europe or at national level within the European Union. So there's so much work underway. And like the SURE program that I mentioned there a moment ago, like this is more efficiently funding the income support plans for over 20 million people within the euro area. And I think we need to be telling that story a bit better. And I think the reason we haven't been is we've been so busy implementing the programs in the first place, which of course is the most valuable thing we can do.
Yeah. No, thank you. Can I just turn briefly to the Conference for the Future of Europe? And that's obviously something of great interest to our own members. And you know what we're seeing emerging, I guess, is different perspectives on what the focus of that should be. So you've got, you know, on the one hand, there's certain member states who've been saying they believe the focus should be on lots of things you've talked about, which are the policy issues and how we get out of COVID and so on. And then on the other hand, you've got other institutions or other countries looking for perhaps broader institutional change. So I suppose the timing of the conference, do you think it's right to have that conference starting in May? And how ambitious do you think that the output and outcome from that should be?
So I think it's really good that it's beginning in May, and I know a lot of work has gone on, particularly under our friends in the Portuguese presidency, to reach agreement in relation to it. I'm weary enough of institutional debates regarding the future of Europe, and I'm weary of them because institutional debates tend to lead for demands for institutional change that takes so much time to do. And if you look at two things that we've touched on that 16 months ago would have looked nearly impossible, which would have been the SURE program and the Recovery and Resilience Fund, both of those things have been delivered inside the existing institutional framework of the European Union. And I think we would be we would make far better use of our time, our energy, and our imagination with each other to look at how our institutions can continue to work well for us and creatively for us, as opposed to putting a lot of effort into demands for new arrangements within our institutions or even new institutions. So I'm cautious enough about the institutional focus. Think we can achieve a hell of a lot with what we have at the moment.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, I think that probably positions us to well understand your contribution to that discussion and debate when it comes up. Look back to the political sort of scene for a second across Europe. You know, there's a few major elections on the horizon in member states, particularly Germany in September, and I think France next year. And you're starting to see a lot more chatter about those in the media. So, you know, a pandemic combined with severe economic disruption and an ongoing struggle around the whole issue of disinformation. Is that fertile ground for populism to re-emerge again, do you think? Is that a worry?
It's always a great worry of mine, and I've spent a lot of time here in Ireland over the last few years making the case here for the centre of Irish politics and warning of the dangers of very simple solutions to very, very complex questions. And I think we need to be careful that we continue to anchor our arguments for what we are doing in recognition of the reality that we have for here in Ireland now hundreds of thousands of people on the pandemic unemployment payment. We have across Europe millions of people who've now lost their job due to reasons that are genuinely completely beyond their control or indeed responsibility. So making the case for our efforts and what we are doing has to be always cognizant of the very deep difficulty and challenge that many are facing in their daily lives. I think, however, Maurice, we also should be able to make the case for the value of the European project and for stability with regard to the European project at this particular point. And for example, the fact that within the Dutch election, you saw parties that are aligned to the European centre either do well or in some cases very well. The fact that in Italy, a country that experienced the ravages of this disease in the most human way possible, you saw a new government being formed that arguably deepened the commitment that Italy has to a European response. All of this should give us some further confidence in our ability to make the case for our collective efforts. And obviously the relationship between France and Germany is at the very heart of the European project. So we have then both in September and before next summer, another critical set of elections approaching, and which will have a very big outcome then in our shared efforts across 2022 and beyond.
Can I ask you one last question before handing back to Noel? Some of our members would maybe know, many perhaps would not know, that you're an avid reader of books, and also you contribute from time to time reviews to the Irish Times. So as an avid book reader myself, I'm very interested to hear what you're currently reading, and is there anything you'd recommend to me or to our members?
Oh God, I am a avid reader, and every day finishes up with a little bit of reading to get ready to recover from the day and get ready for the next day. So let me see. So I've just finished off a wonderful Irish novel, which I'll unashamedly give a plug for, Louise O'Neill, and she has just published a fantastic mystery story set in West Cork called After the Silence. And I finished that off over the weekend. And Louise writes about really, really important themes in our society and about really important issues that we all need to think about how we relate to each other. But she managed to combine really deeply serious themes with a great story of a story and a death that happens in an island that I think is mirrored of Shirkin Island. And I thought it was a great read, and I finished that off on Saturday afternoon. So I really recommend that for an Easter weekend read. And then on a more serious non-fictional basis, I finished off Vince Cable's new book, which is called Money and Power. And Vince is a great writer about economics and politics, and his autobiography, a book called Free Radical, I thought was a great political biography. But Money and Power is a collection of essays about economic policy makers and about how economics influence their political decisions. And it mightn't quite be a read for an Easter weekend, but it is a very, very well written book, and I certainly recommend that.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. Well, you've sold 2 books anyway today.
Good.
So,
and of course, it goes without saying, I mean, we're in a renaissance of Irish modern writing at the moment.
Yeah.
And there are so many new extraordinary writers that are just flourishing and writing amazing books, that we are really spoiled to be alive with so many new Irish writers at the moment enriching us. And there's so much to be proud of and so much to be able to enjoy from all of our writers at the moment.
Yeah, great. I appreciate it. I mean, it's so often the case, is it not, that we have to find from abroad that we have Irish quality writers here, because I talk to people in other countries and they mention an author to me that I hadn't even heard of, and I discovered that they're actually famous, and their output is well regarded in other states and not here. So thank you.
I mean, if you look at the way in which newspapers, from the Guardian to the Financial Times, will cover writers like Megan Nolan, Kevin Barry, it always struck me that, for example, it's American newspapers even at times that cover off Irish writers with an aplomb and a scale that's amazing, that I don't think we're always kind of fully aware of. So lots to really enjoy at the moment.
Great, thank you. I'm going to hand you back to Noelle now, because I know she has a number of questions come in from members who are on the webinar. So again, can I just finally thank you for your openness, your frankness, and your deep understanding of what's going on in Europe, and helping to demystify it for us, which is part of our own project at European Movement Ireland in terms of our European connections. So thanks for that, and I'll hand back to Noelle.
Thank you, Maurice.
Thanks a million. Thanks, Maurice, and thanks, Minister. Fantastic questions coming in, Minister, and great to see. So if people want to get those questions in, events@europeanmovement.ie. We'll see if a couple of more maybe come in on anything book-related, Minister. But a lot of them that we've received so far are pertaining to your main portfolio hat. So I might try and ask you a couple of those questions. And the first one in from one of our long-standing members, Lorcan Blake. And Lorcan is wondering, what are the main economic pillars of the Eurogroup policy response to the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? And are the 8 member states who are not part of the euro area included, given the community-wide impact of the pandemic? And I might just put 2 together, Minister, if that's okay, because we have a good couple coming in. And what are the Minister's personal views of reforming the EU's fiscal rules post-COVID? And that's from Michael. Should the Eurozone debt and deficit limits be permanently loosened or tightened in the future? So I might ask you to take those, that route, Minister.
Sure. So to begin with the first one, there are so many different pillars of our budgetary response back to COVID-19. I'll just pick one. And that pillar, ironically, because a pillar implies something that is rigid and unyielding, but actually a different kind of pillar has been the willingness of finance ministers to be very agile and flexible in what we are doing. So, for example, for the euro area to agree the need for flexible budgetary policies for 2021 and for 2022 is the kind of statement that many would not have associated with the work of Eurogroup in recent years, but is a recognition of the extraordinary times and challenges that we are in, and a recognition also of the fact that we can only begin the improvement in our debt and deficit metrics when we have employment and growth going in the right direction again. In relation to the question then about how we include and how we engage with our non-Euro partners within the European Union, that goes back to the importance of the Eurogroup working in inclusive format. And in inclusive format, what I simply mean by that is we invite in all of our non-Euro friends and partners into the Eurogroup meeting so we can discuss issues in the round with them. And while that sometimes opens up then questions regarding what our relationship is with ECOFIN, they're easily dealt with then by coordinating our meetings with the presidency of the European Union each month, which in this case is our friends in Portugal. In terms of the fiscal rules and their future, I think the most important thing about that particular debate is to pick our time very carefully for when we actually open up that debate. And I believe the Commission, Commissioner Gentiloni, Dombrovskis, have been very, very adroit about how to handle that. And they've clearly indicated that it will be towards the end of this year when we will reopen public consultation on those rules, because we have so many challenges to deal with now. We have to ask, how would those challenges be easier to deal with if we were to open up a debate on fiscal rules now? And I think that's been very well managed by the Commission. In terms of their future, 2 points on that. First one is we do need to recognise that many of the figures in relation to the fiscal rules are actually enshrined into EU law, and changing those figures would be a huge project. I think what will also influence the debate about the fiscal rules will be the other great challenge that the Union has to respond back to, which is the challenge of climate change and how we invest in a lower carbon future. And my own personal view, and here at this point I speak as Minister for Finance for Ireland, is that those two projects and debates will come together in 2022 as we think about the economic decisions that are needed, both to begin the path back towards budgetary sustainability, but also the budgetary decisions that are needed to deliver the climate commitments that the European Union now has just made. So I can see all of that coming together across next year.
Thank you very much, Minister. Questions coming in thick and fast, so I'm going to give you another group of them, and appreciate as ever your frankness and forthrightness. So, what is the total EU fiscal recovery effort is much less than that of the US, and I think you spoke about that in your address. As the economic impact of the pandemic is lasting longer than once expected, Emmanuel Macron and Mario Draghi have spoken about the need to increase the EU funding agreed last summer. Would this be economically desirable, and if so, politically possible? And that's come in from Rory. And then one on social media, Minister, from Michael. Can the Minister please explain why Ireland's aviation sector is yet to be provided with substantial government support and a recovery plan? Other EU countries have taken the steps to protect their aviation industry, which is critical to economic recovery. So I might just ask you, Minister, to go with those two, because I have another couple coming in after that. Thank you.
So I think the focus on the RRF for now will have to be on how we implement what we have agreed. And as additional national measures are needed to assist in national speeds of recovery, it will be more effective to look at how those decisions can be taken at national level, particularly given the very accommodative stance which the European Central Bank has indicated up to March of next year. So for now, the focus on the RRF will be on implementing what we have. In terms of aviation, we put in place massive plans to support aviation. And because our plans are generally have been so well designed and implemented and so big, it has meant that the largest beneficiary and recipients of those plans have been the sectors that need the help the most. So I can't name companies who benefit from our general schemes, but I think it is perhaps unsurprising that if you look at, for example, our wage subsidy schemes, you'll find that one of the largest sectoral recipients of our wage subsidy schemes have been aviation. And of course, we've put in place a very significant loan program for companies within aviation that need particular help. And of course, some of the companies that have benefited the most from the decisions that have been made in relation to commercial rates and waivers have been aviation companies. So I'm The aviation sector has needed substantial support from the Irish government. It has got it, and we'll continue to support the aviation sector on its path to recovery. But it's also the case that no government can take the place of no planes flying, or a very small number of planes flying. And what will ultimately be the biggest support to aviation is the restoration of safe travel. And that, of course, is what we're all working on now through our vaccination programs.
Great, thank you very much, Minister. And we are all very, very hopeful and eager for the vaccination program here in Ireland to gather pace and momentum, because I think getting back to a new normal will be really, really important in terms of that economic recovery, as you talked about. Minister, a couple of questions coming in relation to a question here from Daniel on the suggestions by some EU leaders at last week's Council Summit that the next generation EU instrument may have to be increased beyond its existing 750 billion capacity due to the continuing effect of COVID-19 on member states. Does the Minister see a similar potential need to add to the instrument's capacity? And then a supplementary question, so giving him two bites of the cherry. How does the Minister view the long-term future of the EU's Stability and Growth Pact in light of the impact of the ongoing pandemic?
Well, the conclusions from last week from the Eurozone Summit and from the European Council focused on how we implement the Recovery and Resilience Fund. And that is where our focus needs to be. It is an extraordinary plan in scale and also in the speed with which it has now been implemented. And our efforts need to be on how we can accelerate our vaccination program within Europe and how we can implement the RRF. And that is what we're all working very, very hard to do. In terms of the Stability and Growth Pact, I think that covers some of the questions you put to me there a moment ago, Noel, about our deficit and debt targets. And as I said, I think that the biggest new development in the background of the debate on the Stability and Growth Pact will be the ever-increasing awareness of all that we will need to do to combat the effects of climate change and to invest in a lower and then no carbon future. And that will be a really important element in those discussions. But again, I go back to the care with which this has been managed by the Commission. What is critical now is not the focus, is not how we the focus on the future of fiscal rules. What's critical for now is we implement the right budget policies for the euro area and for Ireland. And that's where we need to put all our energy and time. If we don't have budgetary policy in place that can support growth and get employment growing again, which in turn then will help with all the other things we're concerned about, that debate in relation to fiscal rules and their future will become even more challenging. And for now, all finance ministers and prime ministers are focused on the right budgetary policy.
Right, thanks, Minister. Just a final two questions, Minister, that have come in. And just one of them from Ricard. He's wondering that given the ongoing European tax changes, will Ireland be able to retain its 12.5% corporate tax rate?
So again, at this point, I should make emphatically clear that I'm speaking as Minister for Finance for Ireland and not President of the Eurogroup, because these are topics that many colleagues have many differing views on. And taxation is also not a prerogative of Eurogroup. It's an ECOFIN matter because it's an EU-wide matter. That being said, yes, I am confident that the future of our 12.5% tax rate and our ability to stand by it, that we will continue to be able to do it, and that I will. Alongside that, the debate in relation to international taxation continues. And as I've been saying now for a number of years, change is coming. The international background for corporate taxation is changing. And that backdrop has been accelerated by the effects of the pandemic. And that will mean new rules on really important issues from the OECD and a renewed focus on the implementation of those rules within the European Union. And it is why in the pre-pandemic era, I was making the case for having a budget surplus here in Ireland, because those changes will have an effect on Ireland. Now, that effect, however, will also happen at a time in which something else will take place that will be of benefit to Ireland, which is stability in relation to these issues for a number of years. So reaching an agreement is of value for open economies because it brings stability. Reaching an agreement also changes the environment within which our laws are implemented and our policies are implemented. So it's going to be a very complex environment across the next 12, 18, 24 months on tax. And while those things that we focus a lot on here in Ireland, I'm confident we'll be able to maintain our focus on national position on, there is also going to be change happening all around us that will affect us.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Minister. And I might use my role as host and moderator for today's webinar, Minister. If I might just ask you, going back to your Eurogroup hat, and thank you, a bit like what Maurice said, your insights were fascinating. And actually, I think we all learned a lot about the inner functionings and workings of the Eurogroup and the role of President, which we might not have been as familiar with. So thank you for that. Just in terms of that role for yourself, Minister, what do you see as your goals and objectives for the remainder of your term? You have had an unprecedented start to the role, but how do you see that evolving and playing out over the remainder of your term? And what would success look like at the end of that?
4 things. Number 1, further progress on banking union. Number 2, continuing consensus on a budgetary policy within the euro area that will change, that will underpin a faster recovery for the euro area. Number 3, the exact role of the euro with regard to making it more the currency for a transition to a lower carbon future and greater political awareness of choices about the euro. And then finally, continuing to work with my non-euro friends and partners, particularly with Croatia and Bulgaria, who are looking to join the euro in the future, and deepening our relationship with them. So I have 4 things in mind, and I'm going to and determined to make progress on the 4 of them across the rest of my mandate. And I have a team here in Dublin and in Brussels that are as focused on those priorities as I am.
Fantastic, Minister, and continued success to you and all your colleagues in that regard. We might get you back for the report card at the end of your presidency. How does that sound?
Back before then, Noel.
Fantastic. No, brilliant. We'll have a regular standing session with your good self. Thank you so much, Minister. Look, I really wish we could continue talking this morning. It's been hugely informative, and I know from the great comments and feedback we're getting that our members and our stakeholders and all the audience really appreciated your time, your honesty, and your engagement with us. So look, if I could thank you, Minister, on behalf of Maurice, myself, and everyone tuning in today, to thank you for joining us this morning for such a very engaging conversation with you. Maurice, did you want to come back in or anything on that, or?
No, I just like to thank again, Minister, for his time, because I mean he's a very busy minister, as we all know, wearing all the hats he does. I mean, again, I suppose my final comment is, Minister, it's always been a good policy to, if you need to get a job done, give it to a busy person.
And wise words from Maurice, our chairman there, Minister. But thank you so much. Before we let everyone go, if I may just take the opportunity to mention our next event here in European Movement Ireland, which will be the first actually in a three-part series of engagements that European Movement Ireland will be hosting in conjunction with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Foundation. And that first event is entitled Two Islands, One Future, Ireland, the UK and the EU. It will feature a great panel of speakers, very high level, including the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, Dr. Katja Leichert, who is a member of the Bundestag and Vice President of the CDU-CSU Parliamentary Group, and the Right Honourable Sir David Lidington, former Minister for the Cabinet Office. So that's taking place on Thursday, the 15th of April at 10 a.m. Irish time. So make sure to register for that, and all information available on our website, europeanmovement.ie. Certainly not an event to be missed. And with that, once again, a very sincere thank you, Minister Donohoe. You've always been a long-standing supporter and champion of us here in European Movement Ireland, not least the times that we've had to work with you when you were Minister of State for European Affairs. And we continue to wish you continued success wearing your multiple hats, and to you and all your colleagues. We appreciate all your hard work and continued success for that. And ladies and gentlemen, if I may as well, thank Maurice Pratt, who is well, I was going to say, Maurice, you're equally as busy as the Minister with a lot of different hats. But thank you, Maurice, for your time and all your engagement and support. And I would like to thank the Minister's Office for all their assistance in making today's event so successful, my own team in European Movement Ireland, and all of you for your engagement. Until the next event, please do take care of yourselves. All the best, and slán go fóill. Gurb míle maith agam.